Hello and welcome everybody back to another exciting episode of Inside the Dohyo. I'm Scott Finlay, and as always, I'm joined with my legend of a co-host, John Trail, who once again has pulled a rabbit out of his magic hat and won us a watch with the special guest he's arranged for you all today. So before I fanboy out and you struggle anymore to understand my Scottish accent, let's go straight into the podcast with John to introduce who we have today. John.
Yes. Thanks for that, Scott. Now it's my pleasure to introduce one of the most colourful and knowledgeable sumo personalities on the planet. If sumo was a religion, she would be the high priestess in the Church of Sumotology. She's my predecessor as president of the Australian Sumo Federation, and she is currently director and publicity officer of the International Sumo Federation. She spent 25 years in Japan at the Kobe Shoin Women's University as an associate professor. She was color commentator on the NHK Sumo satellite broadcast for a decade from 1995 to 2005. And for those of you who don't know, a color commentator adds all the juicy stories and interesting tidbits after the play-by-play announcer articulates the live action. I'm sure if she was back in the commentary booth, we wouldn't have to listen to them all repeating Wakataka Kage's name over and over and 50 times or more. She's traveled the world as an interpreter, stadium announcer, and chaperone for the Professional Japan Sumo Association and the Amateur International Sumo Federation. She was also involved in setting up the Women's Sumo Federation, which included advising them on potential wardrobe malfunctions. For nearly 30 years, she's been the keystone of international sumo. Teams from all around the world look to her to solve a myriad of serious or trivial problems, such as big heavyweights suffering from life-threatening owies on their pinky fingers, to having to diplomatically nod and listen to stories of coups and insurrections within national sumo federations. She is fluent in Japanese and several other languages. She even learnt Russian after a coach angrily pounded on the official table, demanding that the name of his athlete be pronounced correctly. The name is Ivan Ichidik, not Ivan Ichidik. She can effortlessly translate the verbal diarrhea of any Japanese official into intelligible English. Sumo in Australia and Oceania would not exist without her innovative fundraising and recruitment skills. It takes a certain type of bravery to go up to formidable-looking roller derby girls as large as 180 kilos and tell them that they'd be naturals at sumo. At our sumo sake chanko parties, where we wash down unlimited bowls of chanko with a few barrels of sake, the guests actually stop chattering amongst themselves to listen, because they're just so mesmerized by her pearls of wisdom about sumo. Normally, you can't control that many people in a confined space. We have shared some wonderful experiences together in a dozen or so countries at the Sumo World Championships, World Games, and World Combat Games. She brought Akebono to an Oceania tournament on the Gold Coast, arranged for the entire Minazake Bear to visit Australia, and was involved in negotiations with Chiyo Fuji to do beach sumo in Oz before he passed away. She's gotten me out of mischief and averted international incidents on many occasions. To hundreds of Rikishi, she is like their fairy godmother. Many of them have very fond memories of her kindness, especially when they were just hungry and homesick, lowly ranked little shakers around the hair. She is famous in the sumo world for baking them cakes, cookies, and giving them all sorts of goodies to make life in the hair a little less painful. She has chewed the fat and ridden chubby little horses in Mongolia with Asashoryu, been to spam parties with Hawaiian Yokozunas, or is it Yokozunai? And at Ishiuda's wedding, I noticed Hakuho and all the other important oyokata were lining up to give her big warm hugs. If you don't know her, you really don't know enough about sumo and haven't heard all the great stories. So let's give a sumo-sized welcome to Katrina Watts.
Gosh, I'm speechless after that introduction. I don't think there's anything left to say, John.
No, I had to take some of the stories you've told me can be a bit personal, but you tell me those because you know what amuses me. So
it's certainly been an interesting life in sumo.
And it is such an honour to have you on the show and going to give your pearls of wisdom out to everybody and everybody who listens in with us. So I'm so grateful that you found the time in your busy schedule to come and give us what spare time you have.
It's a great pleasure to join you, and I'm very honoured that you invited me, because you guys are doing a great job in helping people to enjoy and understand sumo more.
Oh, well, I mean, thanks very much for saying that. That is what all we're trying to do. Of course, as you guys all know, John is the real brains behind this operation. It's his brilliant sumo knowledge that he imparts. But of course, a lot of John's source is you yourself, Katrina. So it's really good to get to talk to somebody with such an expertise as you, and not just knowing about sumo, but about Japanese culture and etiquette and all of these things, because you don't meet many people who's basically the full package like that.
I'll do what I can to impart a few pearls tonight.
Have me and John laid a blanket of pressure on you with such intros, thinking, oh, what am I going to do now when they two are off on a tangent?
Look, it's nothing compared to some of the things I've done in professional and amateur sumo. A bit more pressure elsewhere.
You're extremely brave. Some of the characters we have to deal with can be really quite scary, but you're good at being diplomatic on every occasion. I was telling Scott that you never have a bad word to say about somebody, but if you've confirmed, I go, is that guy dead? You're like, yes. Then we know they're dead. Well, you won't actually say it yourself.
No, once I did lose my temper when I was given the unpleasant job of collecting the accommodation money at a tournament in Osaka, and a country which I shall diplomatically not mention were quibbling about how many people were staying and when they arrived. And I was trying to say, well, you just have to pay for what you wrote down on the form, who was coming and what have you. And they were going on and on and on. And in the end, I slammed my hand down on the desk and everybody in the room jumped, and I even frightened myself. So it was a bit of an unusual thing, but even I lost my temper that day.
So John, you, I know, have basically wrote out a full wee script of questions that you wanted to go through with Katrina, and I'm really excited to hear some of the answers. So mate, do you want to get cracking on so that we can start picking this lovely lady's brain?
Yeah, it's not often I prepare for these podcasts because I just like to talk off the top of my head, but we're in the presence of sumo royalty. The history that Katrina has behind her, not just in the amateur scene, but also in the professional sumo scene, is unprecedented. The experiences that she's had, nobody else could even dream of replicating. So I think, firstly, because it's something that's close to Scott and myself's hearts, is the amateur sumo. You've been there since year dot, wasn't it, Katrina, the first ones, or a little bit later?
Well, it's hard to remember, actually. I started going to watch the amateur sumo in Osaka because there's an amateur ring there in Sakai, and some acquaintance mentioned it to me, and I went along. And from the very first, I was really intrigued by the amateur sumo. The professional sumo, of course, they work really hard, and it's exciting to watch, and it's an amazing sport. But they have the advantage of doing it professionally. They have a job. They have 6 tournaments a year. If they lose on the shonichi, they've still got another 14 days to try and make up the score. But in amateur sumo, so many of the competitions are knockout. So if they lose in the first round, that's it. And so all that training that they've done is out the window. So I could see that the competitors were really doing their best, but in such a heartfelt way that it was impossible not to get involved with that. And it was really a bit of an eye-opener, because the amateur sumo is by weight division. So there was a big variety of competition. And pro sumo, we don't have any weight limits. So sometimes the smaller guys are quicker or have more technical skill. So it was rather nice to see evenly matched competitions, and from light, middle, heavy. And then also there was a team competition, and that was exciting too, because the camaraderie and the cheering from the mainly universities was quite amazing. My favorite being the Tokyo Agricultural University, and they have a cheer squad. The cheer squad comes wearing a very old-fashioned uniform with a high collar and buttons, grey, and they bring along their daikon radishes, and they wave the daikon radishes in the air when they're cheering, and they have a special cheering song. Others have drums. There was some Kyoto University. They had a particular drumming song that they did to cheer them on. And so that was quite an amazing side of sumo that I hadn't seen before. And then I also started to go to watch the international sumo competitions up in Tokyo. But I can't remember exactly how long ago it was. If I said to John that, well, maybe if I remember some of the names. But anyway, that was how I got to know people like Hoshi Tango and Hoshi Andes, because up there in the Kokugikan, we sat in the booths at the back around the stadium, and Australia was next door to Argentina. So when they came in to cheer for Argentina, I was there cheering for Australia, and we all became buddies. So that was really exciting. And the international sumo was amazing, watching people from so many different countries doing our favorite sport.
Yeah, I think that's when I first met you. You introduced me to Doreen, and then Hoshi Tango, the only first and only Jewish Rikishi. A lot of people don't know that there's been a Jewish Rikishi, so we wonder what he put in his chunker. I hope it was all kosher.
Indeed.
And yeah,
Somehow I doubt that.
Uh-huh.
The kosher chanko. I just don't see that. Do you see that happening?
Nah.
I don't think that happened. I think that was just don't tell anybody sort of thing.
Yeah, or maybe Osuna Rashi, he had Ramadan problems as well, not being able to even drink. So he didn't like the basho and hot climates, did he?
Depends on the individual, I think, because when one guy came from Kazakhstan, I went to meet him at Narita Airport and guide him in. He was going to go to Mito Izumi's hair, to the Takasago there. And he said to me, will I have to drink alcohol? And I said, oh, well, you might be able to refuse, but you might be obliged to. And then he said, will I have to eat pork? And I explained that in the chanko nabe, all sorts of things were put in, and maybe he could eat the vegetables and not eat the meat, but it might still be in there. And he very sensibly said, I will keep my religion in my heart. And that was how he was.
That's a good.
Aye, aye. That's
a good answer.
It would depend on what the oyakata was like, because I remember when one guy came from Russia, and his oyakata insisted that he eat everything Japanese style. And somebody asked me, that was Aran, came from Russia, and he said, could I come to Keiko and have a little chat to him? And he said, oh, I'm so bored with rice because it's so plain. And I said, don't you eat rice in Russia? He said, yeah, but we eat pilaf, and it's flavored rice, and we just have to have this plain rice. And he wasn't even allowed to eat bread. But on the other side, the late Naruto Oyakata, he had a guy from the Czech Republic, and he went out of his way to, they had European style sausages and all sorts of things that would make Pavel feel at home in the hair. So it's interesting to see the different attitudes.
So it's definitely a mixed bag then. It really does depend on the oyakata, the type of person and his view on it, as well as who his disciples becoming. Aye, that's fair.
Would you say that they train harder than professional guys? And why don't promising young hopefuls ever make it to Yokozuna apart from Wajima? It's like Wajima came from the university background. So you've always had the answer to this question. So tell us what your thoughts on that are.
Well,
please.
They do train hard, but of course they can't train in the same way as the professionals. So if you belong to a sumo club, you're probably not training every day, maybe so many days a week. It's got to be after school or after class if you're at university, or at the weekends, and your coaches are volunteers, so they're also constrained by their jobs and their family, so they don't have the same intensity of training, but when they're there they train really hard. As for why hopefuls don't make it, if you go through the university process, so say you're a promising guy or girl, I'm not going to get to the professionals there yet, but if you're a promising elementary school student and you go through the young people sumo and you get into a high school, there might be a sumo related high school that you're scouted to, and then you go on that stream to a university, you are working hard for a long time and doing a lot of matches and possibly have not really developed your strength to peak condition, and getting a lot of injuries along the way. So by the time you get into pro sumo, you might be bringing some injuries with you. One of my favorite guys was Hattori Ryuji, who now works with the Amateur Sumo as an official, and he was Amateur Yokozuna. And when he went into sumo, he already had a herniated back. And by the time he was making his way up the ranks, it was becoming a real problem. And he only got up to Maegashira 1 or 2. And so he retired from sumo because in pro sumo, you are ever after designated by the highest rank you ever got to. So it would be former Yokozuna Hakuho, former Komusubi, whatever. So he didn't want to be former Maegashira. So he gave up there and studied sports. Well, I'm not exactly sure what he studied, something in the sporting work, got a PhD and is now a coach at a university. Kotomitsuki already had a shoulder injury when he came into sumo, into the Sarugatake bear. So even though they were the Yokozuna, they were kind of behind the 8 ball when they got to the pro sumo because they were carrying injuries that they'd sustained over a long, hard university competition career.
Yeah, it was like, was it Chio Zakura, who was one of our friends who was with us in Thailand? He joined Kokonoe Bear. He only got to Dohyo before his back gave out. I thought he was as handsome as Enho, so he would have been very popular. So yeah, it is kind of sad, but we do have amateur sumo to thank for because a lot of people think it's not real. Some can I say twat? Some idiot one was saying that he thinks it's fake sumo, but without amateur sumo we wouldn't have Tochinoshin, Yoshikaze, Enho, who's I think won 3 world championships, Endo, Ura, Ishiura, Kotomitsuki, Takakesho was an open weight gold medalist in the juniors in 2014, Itakeumi, Guedo, Kaise, Osunarashi, Ichinojo, Dejima was the first world champion, and there's a lot of others. So I don't know why people don't understand that the amateur sumo can be a petri dish for some of the most exciting guys in the top division. They may not get to Yokozuna, but they're certainly a lot more colourful, and they're easiest for us to recognise because we knew them before. Have there been any that stood out to you, Katrina, that you knew that they were destined for greatness?
Well, Yoshikaze was one. He was Onishi in the amateurs, and I thought he would do well, but he was actually injured while he was still a university student. He won the All Japan Yokozuna, and then before he could get before he could get the position into the Makushita that's given to somebody who's within the best 8 of the national sumo championships, he had to take a year off sumo, so he wasn't eligible and had to start at the bottom. And I thought he would do more than he did. Who else? But the universities put a lot of pressure on their competitors, and they have not only the desire to win for themselves, but the pressure of upholding the honor of the university. So I think that's a stress that causes them perhaps to overextend themselves.
I do love the tradition that they've got, and as you said before, the way they celebrate. We get in big trouble if we do any of that at the international tournaments, don't we? But it's part of the tournaments, and it's a great way of doing it. But I think it's sort of taboo in the international world because you look like it's disrespectful to over celebrate. It's disrespectful to your opponents to gloat or to sledge or to run around saying, oh, I'm the greatest, or to call yourself champion. They're more honorific terms. Why do you suppose that?
Well, I think in sumo in general, the idea is that it's based on politeness. So you begin with a bow and you end with a bow, and you respect your opponent. And the idea being, if you win, of course you're glad, and you try not to, as John says, try not to gloat. If you lose, you try to say, well, you've taught me a lesson there. I'm not going to do that again. And you're grateful to your opponent for teaching you what you shouldn't do, or giving you a window into how you could improve or do better. So I think it's very difficult in the international sumo to try to keep people not under control, but to instill in them that idea that you need to respect not only your opponent, you need to respect the Dohyo, you need to respect the judges. And it's very annoying when people, particularly to us who know a lot about sumo, when people, for example, walk in front of the judges when they're sitting around the Dohyo, or they come to the Dohyo with their jacket on or a towel around their necks, or they sprawl on the seating when we think they should be sitting up properly and respecting the fact that they're taking part in an important competition. Back in the early days, I think it was Binev from Bulgaria, but I may be wrong. When he won, he did a backflip on the Dohyo.
That's right, I remember.
We were terribly shocked and a bit upset about it. But I suppose it's hard to say, but to we aficionados of sumo, somebody winning and then strutting around the ring with, clasping their fist above their head is just not dignified.
That's right. Yeah, the foreigners are very hard to control, and that's also the reason why the Gyoji has to start us, where in Ozumo. Yeah, can you explain that? Foreigners can't be trusted. Can you explain the difference?
At first, as you know, with pro sumo, at the tachi-ai, the rikishi start, and then the Gyoji says hakeoi. But in the amateur sumo, they just couldn't get them to sync up. And there were so many mata and it was taking so much time that they instituted the rule that you had to put your hands down on the dohyo and wait for the gyoji to start you, which I initially found very irksome, because I thought it should be the two guys concentrating on each other and not listening to something outside what they were doing. But even now, there's still too many mata. There don't seem to be so many in Ozumo these days, but in the amateur sumo, it is difficult because, quite frankly, on the international scale, most of the competitors don't have enough opportunity to compete. And so they're nervous and maybe they're a little bit unsure of what they're doing. And it's difficult, but they need the referee to set them off. Also, in Ozumo, if the mawashi comes loose, they stop still while the gyoji reties it. But it's so difficult to get the international guys to actually hold their places. And sometimes they have to actually restart the match because they're not in the same way. In Ozumo, they're used to it. And I remember a match of Takatoriki against Konishiki. The match went so long they had to separate them and give them a mizuiri. And then the referee had to put them back together. And Takatoriki had his face in Konishiki's armpit when they broke, but he didn't want to put his face back in Konishiki's armpit, as you could well imagine. So the gyoji was kind of like, oh, what do I do? And the judges sitting around, they're saying, no, that foot's not right. No, that hand's too high. So they're saying, you know, you must go back to exactly the same way. In international amateur sumo, that would take all afternoon. So they just separate them and then they start again from the beginning. And the mawashimata, if they can hold their position, they just tie it up again and off they go. But sometimes they automatically let go and they have to start again.
I've got videos of some of the antics taking over 5 minutes. It's a certain country, they all do it, even the juniors, and they're kind of picking their bums and sniffing their fingers and scratching their nuts and scraping. It goes on for 5 minutes.
Yeah.
I have to watch my commentary when I post those videos. I hadn't listened to my words half the time. I go, oh, I should have changed that.
That's disrespectful to your opponent. And some people say, well, you know, this is how the coaches train them to kind of psych out their opponent by putting them off, by making them wait too long. And I don't think that's disrespectful. I think that's a kind of cheating, really.
Yeah.
By systematically coming up with ways to mess with somebody's head other than the way that you're supposed to do it, by the initial stare down, look at each other, know that's how far it should go.
Yeah, of course, sumo, there's a lot of strategy. And if you know your opponent does this kind of tachi-ai, then you might stand further back or you might stand closer up or something. When it's kind of posturing and not getting down to it and basically, trying to put the other person off, that's really, it's not cricket.
You've caught me laughing at the tachi-ai when these people are trying to make mean faces at you, and I'm laughing at them because my eyesight before I got contact lenses was like cross between Zatoichi and Takamisakari. So I could just see these blurry faces trying to look mean, and it cracks me up. And they try all these different antics and things, but at the end, when the bout starts, you just got to go forward. So it's always fun to watch somebody that's trying all this nonsense.
See, when I mean mug, when I try and give a mean mug, I laugh at myself. I can't take it seriously. And my training partner Buckles, anytime I try it against him, he laughs and asks me not to because I look stupid because I'm trying to growl at him and we've known each other all our lives. He says, I know how fake that is. You can't do that to me. So,
Oh, Katrina, speaking of
speaking
of Takamisakari, you were there when he got the nickname Robocop, weren't you?
Yes, I think it was in Osaka. We went to watch the training, and he was a new boy in pro sumo. So he, of course, knew how to do sumo, but he didn't necessarily know what to do in ozumo. So the Oyakata, Azumazeki, the former Takamiyama, he was getting him to come in, and they were teasing him, and they were saying things like, oh, you have to bow to the audience when you come in, which of course is not true, but you do have to respect the judges. And as you see, if they walk in front of the judge for some reason, they put their hand down as a sort of symbolizing bowing as you go past. And he was coming in there saying, no, go out again. And he's so stiff because, of course, he can't see what he's doing, that I'm pretty sure it was Akebono who said to him in Japanese, of course, you know, "Omae nani? What are you doing? Who are you, Robocop or something?" And it kind of stuck after that because he was so jerky. But he always said he didn't want to get contact lenses. He said silly things like, oh, it might fall out on the ring and somebody could hurt themselves if they step on it. But other people had more sports contact lenses, you know, the kind you throw away after. So, and he also said he'd been doing sumo all his life without the contact lenses. So he didn't actually want to see his opponents because it would be off-putting.
Tell us what you told us. Tell us what you told us when they said, "What type of girlfriend are you looking for?" remember he was being interviewed on TV. You told me the story. He immediately blurted out, "I like big breasts. Girls with big boobs."
Takamisakari.
Yeah, and it was on national TV, and they're trying to get him set up with a girl, and that's all he could say.
And I don't remember. I do remember that Kitazakura, when he was asked what kind of girl do you like, he said, "I like the kind of girl who can make a valley with her breasts. You know, you guys don't have if you push them together or you're wearing a push-up bra, you've got a big cleavage." That's what he was saying.
At least they were being honest.
I remember all your stories, but then you've got even more.
Me. Yeah. Oh dear. The Takamisakari, of course, grew up. His family had an apple orchard in Aomori. And he was very good at picking his opponents up and lifting them to one side. And one time he said, well, yeah, I developed that when I was a kid because I had to pick up the boxes of apples and load them onto the truck. So
I'm still processing that, but I'm sorry, I'm a wee bit off track. You know, I'm still processing the hilarity of they two saying that, especially Takamisakari saying that on television. Man, I just wish I was there to see it.
They always ask silly questions, of course. And when you were a Shinjuryo, they would always ask the same things. You know, what are your hobbies, and what do you what sort of woman do you like, and this and that. And I remember somebody said during an interview that they liked a certain kind of coffee or a certain kind of drink, and then they received it from all over the world. So I said to Kitazakura, you know, you ought to say something like, oh, I like trying whiskeys from around the world, and, you know, your fans will send you in whiskey. Oh, yes, he said, that's a good idea. But when they asked him, he said, oh, I like watching movies. I thought, oh, well, they're not going to be sending you those. But maybe they did. Maybe they sent him DVDs.
He's probably got a massive DVD collection by now.
Well
so he has tucked away in a wee suitcase somewhere.
Yes, at least he didn't reveal, although he may have developed that hobby later. He liked to do beadwork.
All right.
Yeah, he liked making things out of little glass beads. And
all right. So
well, Takamisakari's hobby was reading manga. And his oyakata said he was very... what should we say? He didn't like to waste anything. And so he didn't throw the manga away after he'd finished reading. These are like thick, many stories.
So he was a hoarder.
Not quite. Eventually he would tie them up and say, okay, I'm finished with those. But he would read the same ones over and over. And the oyakata was surprised that he always laughed in the same place.
I always love those memes where you see a Japanese man reading a manga or watching something on their iPad, and you can see the reflection in the mirror, what they're really looking at, and on the mirror in the window. But speaking of funny stories, that's one thing I love about when we go away. We can all sit down and chat. I always get Big Martin Sterling, who's the president of the New Zealand Federation, to tell us stories when they were in Lord of the Rings, and then he tells us a story about how he put the death touch on this guy, and he goes, took him 20 years to die, but it still worked. And so one of your stories, which I always get you to tell, is about the spam party. Can you tell us that one, please?
Aye.
Well, if you go to watch Keiko, you really should bring some kind of a gift. So you're going there to watch people train, but you're being invited into the hair. So you don't pay money, but as a sign of respect, you might bring something. So
Of course.
if you were a big supporter, you might send them a crate of beer or, 5-10 kilos of beef or something. Well, I couldn't actually do that, but I would, as John mentioned, I would bake things and what have you. Anyway, one time I was going to go to Azumazeki Bear, and Akebono was there, and a Canadian friend was coming. She lived near a place with a big American store, and she said, "What should I bring as a gift?" And I said, "Spam." She said, no, come on, seriously. I said, "No, really, they're Hawaiian. They love Spam." So she took me at my word, and she bought a few cans of Spam, and we went in, and we're sitting there with Akebono, and I've given him some biscuits or something, and she produces this bag, and he looks inside, and there is the cans of Spam, and he was delighted, a big smile on his face, and he shouted out the window to another Hawaiian guy. He said, "Hey, Percy, get your butt in here. We've got Spam." And this face appeared at the window. He was cleaning his teeth. He looked like a dog with hydrophobia, foaming at the mouth. He's like, "Spam." Excuse me. And they were frying up the Spam and slathering it with ketchup and really enjoying their Spam. So you got to know the right gift.
It was quite controversial. Some mother put the Spam musubi in her kids' lunchbox in the bento, and people were saying, "Oh, what a terrible mother," and things, not realizing that it's considered a delicacy.
Absolutely, yes.
It's so good to have that sort of knowledge in your bag of tricks when you are conversing all the time with Rikishi, and being able to, gift them specific things in that. And this is obviously why you're able to start these relationships and maintain them, by getting to know people like this and being conscious of these sort of things. Do you know what I mean? Which also ties in with their hobbies, knowing their hobbies, right, and taking an interest in them and not just what they're doing inside that circle would really, really help you out in that sort of case as well, I think.
Yeah. Well, it's a courtesy, isn't it? If you know what somebody likes. When we went to Aomori, I remember asking one of the guys, it was his hometown, and I said, "Can I send you something from Aomori?" And he said, "Oh yes, could you send me the such and such an apple juice?" And I was very pleased to do that. And it was a good turn, because many years later, a friend of mine gave me a seat in the second row at the Nagoya Basho in the Mukou Jomen. So I had to sit properly, because you never know when the TV camera is going to be showing you. I had to sit properly. Luckily, I was behind the judge, so sometimes I could move about a little bit or stretch my legs to one side. But by the end of the day, I didn't care who won. I was so hot and my back ached, and I was thinking, I can't stand up. And here comes this guy. And I'm just thinking, I'm going to have to clamber up like a cow. He said, "Oh, Katrina-san, tasukete, help!" And he just reached down and pulled me up. And, that was, that apple juice came back to do me a good turn.
I've been that drunk.
Oh, stop it.
No one will pick me up.
It looks lovely sitting there in the tamari seki watching, but the lights are hot and you got to, well, I'm horrified now when I'm watching the pro sumo because people are not sitting properly. People have got their legs out in front of them, and ladies are not being careful when they uncross their legs. Some people have the same seat for so long. Like there was a guy in Kyushu who was very proud that he had tamari seki number 1 and used to sit in the called Jomen. And I'm sure he's passed away by now because he was quite elderly when I was still going there. But sometimes when they showed historical footage, you go, oh, there's that guy when he was young and his hair was black and his sideburns were long and now he's grey. And, it's really interesting. And now that I don't live in Japan, I don't go to the sumo, still I say, oh, there's Mr. So-and-so, or there's, somebody or other, because they're still in the same seat.
Right.
But they're not giving up until death.
Well, that's interesting, and I bet you a lot of people listening right now had actually no idea that is how that system worked. That you could keep a seat for so long like that.
Yeah, well, you can see it in Nagoya because they wear the brown jackets for the tamarikai.
Right.
In Tokyo, they don't have an identifying outfit. But they do in Nagoya. So when you're looking, well, it's a bit hard with COVID because people haven't been able to, sit regularly. Mm-hmm. And I guess that's why there were some people in the tamari seki who didn't look like they belonged there. But anyway, yeah. So they have a members club.
Yeah, the fans in Japan are actually a bit different to actually a lot different to the online fans. Like, for example, on the subject of henka, I felt this firsthand when I was a victim of a henka, and all the Japanese, my Japanese friends and a TV producer who was filming, he was like, "Oh, it's your fault for falling for that one," whereas everyone else was saying, "What a..." So, what do you think the average Japanese fan thinks of the henkas or the side steps or spiritless sumo? Everybody likes to see a big show and a big throw, but it doesn't always happen, does it?
No, in general, I would say that people recognize that it's an accepted strategic move, but they'd really rather see who is the stronger in a grappling competition rather than who can jump out of the way fast or who can overcome the other person by it's not really trickery. It's if you see your opponent is very low, and sometimes you can just see it when you're watching it. Yeah. This guy's hardly come up off the dohyo, and so somebody jumps away and he just can't stop himself moving forward, or he's so low down that there's no reason not to just slap him down to the clay. But yeah, as you say, really people want to see a good match. And I think that's why particularly people object if an ozeki or a yokozuna does a henka, because they shouldn't need to do that. They should be able to defeat any opponent on their own merits with their strength rather than some other tactical maneuver.
When you watch a bout, are you like me? I focus on it and enjoy it rather than I was asking Murray, how do you see that foot stepped out, or that he's got him by this arm and is about to do this throw, and he's got an ability to look at the whole bout, whereas I tend to sit back and enjoy it. So when you watch a bout, what do you actually focus on? Are you looking at the footwork, or just do you enjoy the whole spectacle of it like I do?
Well, nowadays, when I don't have the pressure of needing to comment on it, it's much easier just sit back and watch the whole thing flow past. But of course, you do naturally watch what's happening with the hands and the feet, because who's got the better grip, whether the feet are moving forward. And very often I'm shouting at the television, don't pull backwards, you idiot, and as one does. I think generally now I watch it more overall, but previously I tried to watch more for how the pivotal moment when one person gets the advantage over the other. So actually it's more enjoyable now. You can just relax. And
Aye. So who is it you're shouting at not to pull back most? Ozeki Shodai, like the rest of us?
Yes, dear Lord.
Every time he fights, I'm just like, please, just stand still with him. Just don't try and drag him backwards, because they all know he's doing it now. And
that's right.
And half the time, I feel like they're not even getting him back. That he just feels like he can't move them back. So instead of being stuck at a stalemate, he's like, I'm just going to try and pull them back and get them to fall forward like that. Stop that.
Yeah, it's you do notice some Rikishi have certain bad habits and or a style that perhaps you think, well, maybe they could try something else. Taka Keisho, for example, is a little bit one pattern, as you might say in Japanese. But I was a bit distressed once when I got a letter at the NHK from a fan who said, "Why do you hate Taka no Hana?"
And with that cliffhanger, guys, we're going to cut part 1 there. But join us next time to find out why that fan said this to Katrina about Taka no Hana, as well as how she saved the likes of Tochinoshin and Gagmaru at an airport at the beginning of their careers. Go behind the scenes in Mongolia with Asashoryu, from hiding behind couches for Musashi Maru, having to scold the Haneda brothers during interviews, travelling the globe with Sumo to a variety of places and having amazing tales to tell from over her years that you don't want to miss. This episode was just the tip of the iceberg. Parts 2 and 3 are coming soon. Like, subscribe, o watanage.